Picture this, a convoy of ships slicing through the Mediterranean, not carrying tourists or luxury cargo, but 8 activists and a message sharper than any naval fleet's arsenal. It's called the Global Sumud Flotilla, and right now, it's not just heading toward Gaza, it's sailing straight into the headlines of international law, humanitarian politics, and military confrontation. This isn't just another story at sea, it's the front page waiting to be written, a modern-day clash between principles and power. Israel has drawn a hard line, warning the flotilla that interception is inevitable. The activists on board say they won't resist, but they will document everything. Between them, the Mediterranean becomes more than water. It becomes the stage for one of the most symbolically loaded voyages of our time. Why does this matter? Because it's not just about ships. It's about the right to self-determination, the enforcement of blockades, and the eyes of the world tracking every nautical mile. You're watching at Global Pulse News, where today we take this story apart fact by fact. 5 currents, 5 hard realities, 5 moments that explain why the Sumud Flotilla could be the most important maritime mission of the decade. Let's dive straight into fact number 1. When news breaks about a flotilla bound for Gaza, it is easy to mistake it for just another aid convoy or maritime protest. But the Global Sumud Flotilla of 2025 is different. It is not only the latest attempt to breach Israel's naval blockade of Gaza, it is the largest and most internationally diverse mission of its kind. To understand its impact, we have to understand its makeup, its symbolism, and its message. The flotilla is made up of dozens of vessels, ranging from small fishing boats to larger cargo carriers. Aboard them are hundreds of activists from more than 40 countries, a coalition that includes lawyers, doctors, clergy members, journalists, fishermen, retirees, and students. This variety is deliberate. The organizers want the flotilla to stand as a testament to ordinary people taking extraordinary risks for a political and humanitarian cause. The word Sumud itself, Arabic for steadfastness, reflects the mission's central theme, resilience in the face of overwhelming pressure. What makes this flotilla unique is its refusal to compromise. Earlier offers from European governments suggested unloading aid in Cyprus or other neutral ports, with the supplies then transferred to Gaza under international supervision. But the flotilla has rejected this repeatedly. For them, the act of direct arrival in Gaza is non-negotiable. It is not just about aid, it's about challenging the very legitimacy of the blockade. Israel, for its part, considers the blockade legal and necessary for security. It points to past flotillas where militants or unauthorized goods attempted to slip through under the cover of humanitarian missions. But the flotilla's bathras counter with international law, particularly the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which enshrines the freedom of navigation in international waters and prohibits states from arbitrarily interfering with non-violent ships. Already, this flotilla has achieved part of its mission, global attention. From Madrid to Sydney, Rome to Johannesburg, international media has turned its gaze toward the eastern Mediterranean. The question is no longer whether the flotilla exists, it is whether it will survive the final leg of its voyage without confrontation. If that's the who and the why of this flotilla, the next pressing question is the where. Because on the ocean, where you sail determines who has the power to stop you, and that brings us to the legal battleground of maritime jurisdiction. To understand the Sumud Flotilla's high-stakes journey, you don't just need a compass, you need a crash course in maritime law. Because on the open sea, geography isn't just lines on a map, it's the dividing line between legal passage and naval confrontation. First, the basics. Every coastal nation controls what is called its territorial waters, a strip about 12 nautical miles from its shoreline. Within that band, a state's authority is absolute, from fishing rights to policing foreign vessels. Beyond that zone lies the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ, extending up to 200 nautical miles. Here, countries can exploit natural resources like oil and fish stocks, but unlike territorial waters, they cannot ban innocent passage. Beyond the EEZ, the water is considered high seas, free to all, and governed by the principle of navigation freedom under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Now, the Sumud Flotilla currently operates in a gray zone. Organizers say they are still within international waters, far outside Israel's 12-mile territorial claim. By that logic, interception would amount to a breach of international law, but Israel argues differently. Israeli officials maintain that their blockade of Gaza extends. To understand the Sumud Flotilla's high-stakes journey, you don't just need a compass. You need a crash course in maritime law. Because on the open sea, geography isn't just lines on a map. It's the dividing line between legal passage and naval confrontation. First, the basics. Every coastal nation controls what is called its territorial waters, a strip about 12 nautical miles from its shoreline. Within that band, a state's authority is absolute, from fishing rights to policing foreign vessels. Beyond that zone lies the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ, extending up to 200 nautical miles. Here, countries can exploit natural resources like oil and fish stocks, but unlike territorial waters, they cannot ban innocent passage. Beyond the EEZ, the water is considered high seas, free to all and governed by the principle of navigation freedom under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UCLOS. Now, the Sumud Flotilla currently operates in a gray zone. Organizers say they are still within international waters, far outside Israel's 12-mile territorial claim. By that logic, interception would amount to a breach of international law. But Israel argues differently. Israeli officials maintain that their blockade of Gaza extends into international waters, giving them the right to stop any vessel they suspect of smuggling weapons or aiding Hamas. It is a bold interpretation, and one that many legal scholars and governments dispute. This is where it gets complicated. Some states, including Spain, Ireland, and South Africa, have publicly said that Israel has no authority to interfere with ships lawfully navigating the high seas. Others, including Italy and Cyprus, walk a finer line, balancing humanitarian support with security concerns. The divide illustrates how maritime law, though codified, often bends under the weight of geopolitics. If Israel does intercept the flotilla in international waters, it could spark international legal challenges. Past flotilla incidents, including the deadly 2010 raid on the Mavi Marmara, ended up in courts and international forums for years. Legal experts say a repeat could reignite debates on the legitimacy of the Gaza blockade itself. The flotilla's organizers know this. For them, every nautical mile is not just travel, it is evidence, a legal marker that can be documented, recorded, and later used to challenge Israel's actions. In that sense, the journey is already part courtroom, part protest. Of course, laws look clean on paper, but on the water, enforcement comes with drones, warships, and blinding floodlights. So let's dive into what's actually happening out there in real time. If international law frames the flotilla's journey, the reality on the water writes a far grittier script. Forget legal textbooks. Out here, the conversation is carried out in drone whirs, naval shadows, and the tension of radio silence. As of the latest reports, the Global Sumud Flotilla is roughly 120 to 150 nautical miles off the coast of Gaza. This places it firmly outside Israel's official territorial waters, but well within what the flotilla calls a high-risk zone. That label is not dramatic flair. It reflects the pattern of past encounters, where Israeli forces typically move in long before ships reach the 12-mile barrier. Eyewitness accounts from onboard activists describe unsettling nights, According to reports, unlit vessels approached the convoy under cover of darkness, raising fears of imminent interception. Without navigation lights, those ships would have been nearly invisible on the horizon. An intimidation tactic activists say is designed to unsettle rather than openly confront. But intimidation is only part of the equation. The flotilla claims it has already been subject to drone surveillance and aerial harassment, with buzzing machines circling low above decks. In some instances, activists report the use of stun grenades and communication jamming, leaving them temporarily cut off from satellite internet and external contact. For a mission so heavily reliant on live updates and global publicity, this kind of disruption strikes at the heart of their strategy. Meanwhile, the escort role of foreign navies further complicates the picture. Italy and Spain initially dispatched naval ships to shadow the flotilla, offering a layer of deterrence. Yet Italy announced it would withdraw its escort once the convoy reached 150 nautical miles from Gaza, citing fears of being drawn directly into confrontation with Israel. For activists, this means the final stretch of their journey is likely to be the most dangerous, both symbolically and physically. The flotilla's organizers remain defiant. They have rejected repeated proposals to offload aid in third-party ports, insisting that only a direct arrival in Gaza carries political and moral weight. Quote, "We will not resist boarding," activist David Adler wrote in a statement, "but we will document everything." For them, visibility is the shield and silence is the threat. The standoff at sea has now turned into a battle of endurance between activists who bet on the power of cameras and states that rely on the force of warships. Still, what happens at sea isn't just about shadows and standoffs. It's also about stories, and the narratives each side tells may shape the fallout more than the actual clash. Let's unpack those competing claims. In high-stakes confrontations, the story is often as decisive as the strategy. The Global Sumud Flotilla is not only about ships heading for Gaza, it is also about how the mission is described, framed, and contested across governments, media outlets, and public opinion. In many ways, the battle of narratives is running in parallel with the battle of navigation. On one side stands Israel's official stance. Israeli authorities argue that the blockade on Gaza is not only legal but essential for security. Their position is clear. Any ship attempting to reach Gaza directly could carry contraband or weapons, even if disguised as humanitarian aid. They cite past instances where cargo bound for Gaza included dual-use materials, items that can serve both civilian and military purposes. Israel has offered alternatives, saying aid can be offloaded at the port of Ashkelon, where it will be inspected and transferred to Gaza under controlled conditions. From this perspective, the flotilla is painted not as a humanitarian mission, but as a provocation, an operation that deliberately courts confrontation. Some officials go further, suggesting that organizers may have ideological or political ties to groups hostile to Israel. These allegations remain unproven, but are frequently repeated in pro-Israel narratives to justify potential military action. On the other side is the flotilla's rebuttal, amplified by activists, international observers, and sympathetic governments. They argue that Israel's blockade itself is the violation, the very reason the flotilla must exist. Humanitarian groups stress that Gaza faces a humanitarian catastrophe, with shortages of medicine, fuel, and food. For them, the flotilla's mission is a moral one, to break the cycle of siege and remind the world of Gaza's right to unimpeded access. Supportive governments like Spain's have reinforced this framing. Spain's foreign minister publicly stated that the flotilla poses no threat to Israel, emphasizing its civilian nature and peaceful intent. Ireland, South Africa, and others have voiced similar views, while Italy has taken a more cautious line, warning that the mission risks escalation even as it acknowledges the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The result? A split-screen global audience. One narrative highlights security and law enforcement. The other underscores human rights and resistance to occupation. both are now locked in a struggle for legitimacy. And the verdict will not just be written at sea, but in the headlines, diplomatic statements, and international courtrooms that follow. And that takes us to the final and perhaps most critical dimension. Because whether the flotilla makes it through or not, the ripple effects of this mission will reach far beyond the Mediterranean. If the Sumud Flotilla were only about ships, it might have stayed a niche headline. But the stakes attached to this mission stretch far beyond the waves, and they make every nautical mile a potential flashpoint with global consequences. At the most immediate level, there is the question of human safety. Hundreds of activists from more than 40 countries are aboard the flotilla. Should Israel intercept forcefully, any harm to civilians could quickly escalate into international outrage. Past flotillas have taught this lesson vividly. The 2010 raid on the Mavi Marmara, which left 9 activists dead, remains a stain on Israel's diplomatic record and a rallying cry for pro-Palestinian movements. Organizers of the Sumud Flotilla know that even if their mission is stopped, the image of peaceful civilians being subdued by armed forces could serve as a powerful symbol. Diplomatically, the implications are equally sharp. European states are already divided. Spain and Ireland have spoken openly in support of the flotilla, casting it as a legitimate humanitarian act. Italy, by contrast, has urged caution, warning that the mission risks derailing ceasefire negotiations and sparking escalation. If Israel detains foreign nationals, including European parliamentarians and prominent figures on board, the crisis could evolve into a major diplomatic standoff, straining alliances and forcing reluctant governments to respond. Legally, the confrontation risks becoming another high-profile test of international maritime law. If Israel boards vessels in international waters, flotilla organizers plan to document everything and pursue legal action in international courts. This could reopen debates about the legality of the Gaza blockade itself, putting Israel's strategy under a magnifying glass at the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, and beyond. Strategically, the mission also shapes the broader narrative of the Gaza conflict. By sailing, the flotilla has forced global media to refocus on Gaza's humanitarian crisis. In this sense, the activists have already partially succeeded, regardless of whether their ships dock in Gaza. They have shifted attention, mobilized public debate, and made the siege of Gaza a matter of renewed urgency. The possible outcomes range widely. At best, a mediated solution could see the flotilla redirected, but with aid eventually reaching Gaza through compromise. At worst, a violent confrontation could add another flashpoint to an already fragile regional situation. Between those extremes lies the most likely outcome: an interception, detentions, and a political battle that plays out on screens and in courtrooms for months to come. And with that, we circle back to the bigger picture. Because whether the flotilla sails in or is stopped at sea, its voyage is already echoing worldwide, and it's a story still being written, hour by hour.